Before I even start today's subject matter review, I'd like to share a little story, a little anecdote, if you will. This may take a while, so please bear with me. About a couple years ago, a friend of mine had unloaded his collection of Atari video games on eBay and got rid of pretty much all of them except for one sole game cartridge that for reasons unknown he wasn't able to sell to anybody. I'm not making this up, this is a true story that really happened, I promise. It only dawned on him on that particular point that I actually had an Atari 7800 ProSystem to call my own, and conveniently enough the game in question was a 7800 game, and thus he tried to sell me this particular game cartridge for about a couple bucks at most. Naturally, being a good-hearted, kind-natured fellow that I am, I pretty much told him to go f*** himself. Partly because he didn't offer any of the other games in his lot that I would have had more interest in getting before he sold that lot off, and partly because the game in question was a game that I can remember playing back in 1988, when I was a kid who gamed on his Atari 7800 ProSystem while everybody else had Nintendo, and during those innocent times when I wouldn't know a bad game if it bit me in the ass, I first found myself exposed to this thing, and it was at that point that I discovered that the game was truly hideous, and I could vividly remember the emotional scarring that this game had caused to all those who had played it. My friend was insistent, almost pleading with me to get this game off his hands, even offering it to me for free. He wanted me to at least give the game another shot and to see if my tune had changed in the 20 plus years since I last played it. You know, maybe time heals all wounds and all that stuff. Hey, it could happen. There are games that I remember not caring for as a younger fellow that I actually found myself enjoying today. And while I might not have played the original computer version that this Atari 7800 game was based on, I did manage to play the Famicom version, and that version was actually somewhat decent, even if it wasn't my cup of tea. So maybe my childhood disdain and horror for this Atari 7800 game cartridge, a super game cartridge no less, was just that, and it's not really as bad as I made it out to be. It was certainly possible. So I told him, sure, why not? I bring it home, I plug it into my Atari 7800, I push the power button, I sat through the Atari logo, and was soon greeted with a simple glowing title over a static black screen while an annoying tune plays throughout. A tune that also plays in the game over screen, which comprises a similar line of text over a static black void. In terms of presentation right off the bat, it's very minimal, that's okay, not a big deal. As soon as I pick up the controller and start the game, it starts to come back to me, and it was at that point, playing into it, that I realized this game isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. It's much worse than that. Naturally, like I do with whenever I play a game, I record what footage I could onto DVD-R, and then I stop playing. I toss the card aside to play a worthwhile Atari 7800 video game such as Joust or Pole Position. But then I went back to that game, and I played it a little while more. And I managed a somewhat better game, which says very little about the game itself. I, at the very least, found myself indoors. But sadly for you, the viewing audience, I didn't record this session of play because the DVD was full. So you're only left to watch me stumble and fumble with the game's putrid and outright crippled controls. This one major issue, above all else, makes this game one of the weaker titles, if not the weakest title, in the Atari 7800 library, lacking any of the fun, polish, or excitement of other games on the system, let alone anywhere else in the universe. Never before has the simple story of a young blonde karate master fight through numerous baddies to save the princess from the evil karate master felt so insipidly uninteresting or broken than it does in this game. The game's graphics are not that interesting whatsoever. The backgrounds seem good enough, even if they are a bit simplistic in nature, and there's some nice scrolling effects of the foreground here and there, but the actual characters are pretty dull. The proportions are alright, all things considered. There's some nice animation for the most part, but there's no depth in character design. It seems like this game only has 5 main characters in the entire game. The player character, the main villain, the princess you have to rescue, the occasional bird that picks off energy, and the enemy opponent, who simply shows up again and again wearing the same pastel outfit, only in different colors in each round. And here I thought Mortal Kombat went crazy with the palette swapped ninjas, but this game is an even worse offender. I suppose it's hard to find fault here if this was the case in the original computer. Nah, forget it. Sound in this game is pretty minimal. A couple jingles, beeps, bleeps, meh. Nothing of note. It might not sound like it, but that's actually a good thing, all things considered. Setting aside the bland visuals and lackluster sound quality, the main issue of this game, the thing that truly destroys this game, is the gameplay. More specifically, the absolutely crippled controls where you're supposed to press a button to swap between fighting stance and running stance, and wiggling with the joystick to perform a variety of punches and or kicks at different altitudes. I'm not sure how the computer versions handled this, but I'm willing to guess they worked better than this. Sure as hell no, I have better control on the Famicom version, which by the way, the standard Famicom/Nintendo Entertainment System control pad has 2 action buttons. In the Famicom version of the same game, one button punches and the other kicks. I don't see how the developers of the 7800 conversion could not have done the same thing with the Pro-Line controller, considering it also had 2 buttons that could be assigned different functions. In fact, such a feature exists on a number of 7800 titles such as, well, Xevious. Had they taken the approach adopted by the Famicom version, the game would have been far more playable and somewhat bearable. But they didn't go with that. They went with a control scheme so convoluted and so wretched that it makes the game unbearable to play, and that's not even taking into account the near 2-second lag that occurs between the input of a button and the execution of the actual attack. It takes a goddamn near miracle just to get anything done as a result, and takes an incredible amount of patience to put up with this shit control scheme. Not helping matters is the poor collision detection, as certain blows will miss completely even though they're touching a target. Likewise, certain blows that miss the target by a yard will still somehow register as a hit. This kind of programming mess, along with a putrid control setup, makes what could have been a decently above average one-on-one fighter an almost agonizing experience, with the end results of these one-on-one battles relying more on pure chance than any semblance of pure skill. The sad truth is that this game, somehow dubbed a super game cartridge, God only knows why, does not work well on a console that does not come with a keyboard or at the very least a Nintendo gamepad. The 7800 version of Jordan Mechner's classic computer game is not only the worst port of the game on any console, and I can say this despite not having played the original computer versions, but is also one of the worst games in the Atari 7800 library. Hell, I'll go one better. This game is god-f***ing awful, and that's being extremely kind. Only a select few with an infinite amount of patience can overcome the horrendously broken control scheme and get any semblance of satisfaction out of this game. But any effort attempted towards trying to overcome the tripe gameplay is completely and utterly wasted here. Even if you enjoyed the computer game, or even if you're an avid Atari collector, there is no humanly viable reason whatsoever for you to own this particular game cartridge, unless you need something to smash with a hammer, or you're in need of a good hockey puck or a good paperweight, although I doubt this cartridge would fill either one of those requirements, which is why a couple days later, I ended up returning the game to my friend, who promptly tossed it in the trash. I guess he didn't like the game either. Oh well. Good night.